I need to. I'm here. I just had technical issues. How is everybody? It's been a while. So I'm hoping that my earpods are plugged in. Otherwise, I won't be able to hear Judhika. I'm just going to check. Yes, it should be working. How is everybody? Okay.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Saf. How is everybody doing? Ha, we did it. See? Told you.
Hi.
Okay, what I'm gonna do is see if, oh yeah, this question thing, so you can do that here. Sorry, I'm just having a fiddle with the old, do you turn the kind of questions thing on? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else who is joining, I want to welcome Arani, which is, I hope I pronounced that right. It's
You
a
definitely did.
gorgeous, gorgeous name. Oh, look, somebody said your hair is so cute.
Oh, I think.
That is so cute. Hi, cousin. Oh, so cute. Okay,
The family's all
so,
behind me.
oh, I love that. Hi, Dipu. So Dipu is from India, and we've got people waving. Hi, everyone. How is everyone doing? So it's 8 o'clock in the evening. It's like pitch black here in the UK. So winter is coming, as they say.
Game of
And yeah,
Thrones.
Game of Thrones,
Yeah.
exactly. So why don't
What a
you?
disappointment.
Oh no, tell me about it. Let's not even go there. We'll talk about that another time because that was just like, oh, okay. Anyway, we are here to talk about you as a trainee clinical psychologist, and you have literally going to start very, very soon on the course. And also we are going to talk about Tamil mental health.
Hmm.
So before we get stuck in, I would
Yeah.
love for people who are joining to get to know you a bit more and find out a bit about you.
Okay, I don't know where to start. Um,
Anywhere.
so I'm Arani, but I also have another name, which is Judika, and you can call me whichever you prefer. But for today, I'm Arani. I'm going with that identity. Um, so I'm from South London. I'm from Croydon. I'm very proud of my Croydon heritage, and I'm Sri Lankan Tamil. So my parents immigrated here, and then I was born here, and grew up in Croydon, and now I live in Glasgow. So I am going into my first year of training at the University of Glasgow, and yeah, I'm really excited about it. I don't really know what to expect. I think I've wanted to be a clinical psychologist for so long that it hasn't really hit me at all that this is happening. And I'm mainly really passionate about trying to support people and educate communities around mental health difficulties, especially in the Tamil community, because I think the Tamil community really needs support in that area. I think we're such a passionate community and we have so much to offer, and there's so much coming out of the Tamil world, but I don't really see much support, or I don't really see much um, awareness when it comes to mental health issues. And it's really rather, in my experience of it, it's quite prevalent. So that is sort of why I wanted to try and make a difference and try to go into the psychology field. And really, yeah, I didn't realize how hard it was going to be. Otherwise, I might have done a U-turn. um, if I knew how stressful it was going to be. But yeah, I'm really happy to say I'm now in the position of I can call myself a trainee clinical psychologist, and eventually I can, yeah, maybe go on to do just that, hopefully.
Yes, yes, you will.
Yeah. And I guess the other part of me is that I'm also really keen to support people with lived experience, and really work alongside people who've had the experience of being a carer or having a mental health issue, and using that experience, if they want to better services and make this a better world.
Yeah, exactly. Who better than to
Oh,
have people who, can you hear me? Is the connection not great?
Yeah, I think the signal just went funny. There we go.
Okay.
It's all good.
Yeah, so I think that, it's really important to talk about people with lived experience, and they should be very much fundamental part of, creating services. Yeah, 100%. So especially in the NHS in the UK. Okay, so where do you want to kick off? Where do you want to start? I mean, for me, for those people who know me, follow me, they know that I am Gujarati, so Gujarati from the state of Gujarat, Hindu, born and bred here. And I feel like that from kind of my experience of growing up in the UK, most South Asian representation is usually kind of North Indian. Like, for example, Bollywood. Bollywood is what people assume what India and kind of Sri Lanka and the rest of South Asia looks like. But it's not, is it?
Yeah.
So what would be really good for people who might not understand or might not know of the Tamil community, because we were just saying before, we were chatting before this, of how I know that in London, there are really strong communities of, Sri Lankan Tamil communities there. Birmingham, Leicester, not so much, not so much in the Midlands.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is just, it is what it is. So it would be really good to understand a bit about what it means to be Tamil. What does it mean to be, Sri Lankan? What does that mean? Yeah. To give us a bit of insight into that.
I feel like I need to do a slight disclaimer in that, I'm Tamil and I'm proud of it. But at the same time, I think something for me growing up that's always been a problem is, where do I fall into my British side and where do I fall into my Tamil side? And I think sometimes I'm more towards the British side and sometimes I'm more towards the Tamil side. So I feel like I'm not one of those people who's like super, super, super Tamil, if that makes sense, where I'm like all about Tamil culture. Like I really love to enjoy different cultures and different experiences. So my opinion, obviously, or my experience is obviously not going to be the accurate one for every single Tamil person in the UK or in the diaspora. But I can say objectively, yes, there is a very large Tamil community, especially in London. I went to university in Leicester, did my undergrad there, and I was part of the Tamil school there because I did some teaching in music when I was there. And so there is a growing population in Leicester and in the Midlands of Tamils, but it isn't anything like London. And I think that's something that a lot of the sort of outside of, Midland Tamils or the Tamils in the north would always comment on is, yeah, coming to London is a bit overwhelming with all these Tamil people. So
I love that.
There's some really good points that you made there. I think generally Bollywood and sort of Indian media would tend to lean towards, the North Indian identity. But as you know, Tina, and I'm sure all those Tamils who might be watching this might be screaming out there saying, but we've got Vijay and we've got Danish and like Hollywood and all these amazing artists and music, and our culture is extremely, extremely rich, and it's one of the oldest languages in the world. And when I say Tamil, that's the other thing. There isn't just Tamil. There's Sri Lankan Tamil, there's Singapore Tamil, there's Malaysian Tamils, and Indian Tamils who are. And then, of course, you've got the diaspora, which is obviously everywhere. So there's different accents, there's different dialects of Tamil as well. So even within Tamil Nadu, which is where, people tend to think a lot of the Tamils congregate, which is true, or where they're from, there's different ways of speaking Tamil just within that state. And then you come to Sri Lanka and it's a completely different way of speaking Tamil. And so when we're thinking about representation, the cinema, the media, Tamil media tends to be based around Indian Tamil culture and around using that dialect. And you don't really see much sort of media representation, especially for Sri Lankan Tamils. It is, I think, there's a lot of reasons for that. And a lot of it's only now we're starting to sort of see some talent coming out of the sort of Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora. But it's still, very much the Indian Tamil media that kind of dominates our identity as Tamil people. So yeah, we're very passionate culture. There's lots, and this is the other thing. Even though there's Indian, Malaysian, Singapore, whatever, we all have the same foundation. So we all have mostly the same foods. There's some Sri Lankan foods that are definitely a lot better.
Which ones?
I bet everyone who's Sri Lankan Tamil would have had kotta roti, or what's the other one? I'm blanking already. Kotta roti and mutton rolls. Yes. So
Ooh,
these are like,
sound good.
It's like cut up roti. So kotta roti is like basically a big piece of roti that's cut up into tiny, tiny pieces, using like a big old swinging knife with like really mutton or chicken or fish or whatever you want, with egg and vegetables, and it's all mixed up, and it's, oh my God. Yeah. So there are a few differences.
I love it.
But on the whole, there, we're pretty similar, but we do have definitely a lot of differences in our experiences as well. I think out of all the different Tamil sort of subsections, the Sri Lankan Tamil community has definitely faced a lot of trauma and has a really sad history. And
Can you tell us a bit about that? Can you tell us a bit about that for people that don't know?
Yeah, so in Sri Lanka there are different ethnic groups, and the majority, the most sort of prevalent ethnic group there is the Sinhalese people, and they are mostly Buddhist, and they speak Sinhalese, which is, I think, only found in Sri Lanka. I don't think it's a language that's spoken in any other country. And then you have the Tamil people who live mostly in the north. So Sinhalese people tend to sort of live from the central part of Sri Lanka to the south, and then you've got the Tamils in the north and east. And you've got other sort of races too, like there's other like subsections as well, but the main sort of trauma comes from the sort of atrocities that have happened over the last 30 years. So the war finished in 2009, and it was between the government, and it was between the Tamil people, Tamil Tigers. And because of that war, a lot of Tamil people had to flee the country because they were often under attack or racially discriminated against. And that's not to say that, the Tamil people, those that were fighting for Tamils, there were also atrocities that they would have also committed against the government as well. But it's very fair to say that most of it was against the Tamil people, and there's a lot of evidence for this. I'm not just speaking based on my opinion, I'm speaking based on evidence, because I know this is a very hot topic and I'm trying to be as sensitive as possible, but I think it's fair to say that that was the case. And so a lot of Sri Lankan Tamils fled the country to various parts of the world, which is why we're so spread out. And there was a huge sort of influx, especially in the 80s, because there were there were riots going on in Sri Lanka, and it meant that a lot of Tamil people settled in Canada and England or the UK because they were allowing us to live there. And so when we think about the Tamil community, there's been a lot of trauma. There's been people who have been refugees, people who are refugees from that part of Sri Lanka have reported, being raped, we've had countless accounts of people just being shot in the street for very mediocre reasons or very minor reasons. There was a genocide in 2009 where thousands of Tamil people were put into a very secluded space in Sri Lanka, in the north of Sri Lanka, and essentially bombed by the government. So there are lots of, allegations out there. Some of them, we can't provide evidence for various reasons, but it's very hard not to ignore this when so many people have experienced this. And, working in the field that I work in, I've come across quite a few people affected by this. But like I said, also, the people of Sri Lanka in general have generally suffered because of this war. It's not just the Tamils, but the Tamils were the most affected by it.
Right.
And I think because of this, we've experienced, we're a traumatized community, essentially. And it's definitely seeing its way through the generations, I think.
Okay, that's really important. So I guess this leads us nicely to talk about what is trauma. What does it mean when, somebody or a community experiences what I would class as like a collective trauma? So this, what you're saying is that as a collective group of people, your community came over to the UK, let's just say, and have carried, witnessed, experienced firsthand, directly and indirectly, what we are using the word trauma. Now, for those people who don't understand what trauma is, how would we even start to unpack that? Because it's such a complex concept that we can quite easily use in everyday language flippantly. We do this, don't we? I'm traumatized by watching something on TV or something like that. We use this word. From your experience, from your language, your kind of understanding as a psychologist who is on a journey and who has witnessed this in her community. What does that look like? What does trauma mean? I don't want the DSM or the ICD. Description or kind of, I want to know kind of like, how does it feel to be kind of like seeing this?
It's really, it's difficult. I think I mentioned a few minutes ago that idea of being British but also being Tamil, and I feel like we have labeled ourselves as well as sort of a traumatized community, and rightly so. Of course, we've been through, I can't even say that the people of, the north of Sri Lanka have been through so much that, I can't even imagine. I think what I have seen through my eyes is because of this trauma, our values are very differently aligned. And I think because the war and everything that happened in the last, this isn't just the last 30 years, this has been going on way before that. Of course, it started with the British colonization of Sri Lanka, giving further rights to different racial groups. And that's what started this whole thing off. So this is, not just 30 years, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's been years and years and years of being made to feel inferior, being made to feel like your voice isn't heard, not being able to have those opportunities, not being able to trust even your next door neighbor. Because you don't know if your next door neighbor has gone and told, the army base down the road about your mate who may or may not have been involved in some sort of, horrific thing earlier that week. Okay. And there is, I think, the most sort of, in my short, time working, the most prevalent thing that I've seen is this lack of trust. Really is because of the fact that, we were often tested as a community in terms of how much we can trust each other with information, how much we can trust each other when it comes to life or death. Like, we're constantly on survival mode. I think our parents are still on survival mode. So when they came to this country, most people came with hardly anything. It was about, can I survive? I've been surviving my whole life. Now I don't have to think about whether someone's going to shoot me but now I need to try and at least just survive here and get a job and just live on whatever I can. So I think the to answer your question, there's sort of this sense of I just need to survive, and the only way I know how to survive is to live by what I know in Sri Lanka, which is, okay, we can't really trust each other very much. So there's this real lack of sort of I guess communication from the community. People don't really like to share much about themselves, very guarded as individuals, I think. I think there's also this idea, and this is sort of prevalent within most Asian communities, that stress and anxiety and depression comes out quite physically. So we don't talk about, I feel sad today. I don't think there's even, because of the amount of trauma that's existed within our community, we've lost our way of expressing ourselves, because at the end of the day, we just have to fight to survive. So you feeling sad or feeling happy, there's no time for that. You've got to get to, you've got to survive and try and navigate this world. So I think what that's led to is all of our emotions being pent up in the body, and people really expressing their emotions through arthritis, through,
Wow.
headaches and migraines.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that will be spoken about. So I volunteered in Sri Lanka back in 2015 for 3 months. We only got to go to the north once because of various reasons in that particular placement. And I worked with this amazing psychiatrist for 1 day. It was just 1 day, from morning till night. And he was the only psychiatrist in the whole of this province called Kilinochchi, which is huge. I can't compare it to somewhere in the UK, but it's huge. And he was the only psychiatrist that existed. And he would have a queue of people waiting for him every morning. And interestingly, most of them suffered with psychosis. So when I asked him about it, he said, yeah, I think about 90 to 95% of people he sees have some form of hearing voices. But when you first meet them, they won't tell you that they're hearing voices. They'll tell you, oh, my leg's been hurting for so long, or, my head is just so heavy, or like my shoulders feel tense and I can't sleep, I can't eat. There's this real sort of avoidance when it comes to how I feel, and that sense of, I don't know, I'm making assumption, maybe it's that sense of it's not important, it's not relevant, I don't need to talk about this, or maybe it's just being too afraid to admit how much what they've been through has really affected them. So yeah, trauma, there's so many ways in which it's come out. I feel like I'm giving sort of a long answer there, but there's so much. I would say definitely trust, definitely sort of the physical, psychosomatic symptoms that come out, and yeah, generally just wanting to survive and being on survival mode, which leads to all sorts of other sort of things. Like we have a high prevalence of alcohol addiction in our community. There's a lot of high prevalence of childhood sexual abuse that we haven't been able to research yet, but we're going to get there eventually, hopefully. There's a high prevalence of domestic abuse. There's such a prevalence of, from what I can see, personality issues. Just in terms
when you mean personality issues, I mean, for the non-clinicians, the non-psychologists, the non-mental health professionals who may be joining, what does that mean? What does that even look like? I mean, I'm so glad when you started to talk about trauma, you talked about lack of trust, you talked about hearing voices, because we'll come back to this, but I want to pick on that a bit more. But yeah, let's go with the kind of what does that mean? What does that mean when you say the personalities have been affected? I think, in a nutshell,
it's. I think that the term, to say that your personality has been affected can be quite a heavy thing to say, and it can be quite stigmatizing. I think it essentially, I would say the best way to describe it, and the way that I would agree it should be described, is you are affected by trauma, and if you have difficulties with your personality, it normally means that you difficult trauma in your life, and you've sort of learned to use your personality to defend yourself. And that can often mean you might push people away. It might mean that you really struggle to trust people. You find it really hard to emotionally regulate or to understand what you're feeling in any given day. So maybe you feel sad one second and then you feel elated the next moment. And often people think, oh, that's bipolar. But it's not. This is usually maybe something to do with how you regulate your emotions. And the thing is, if you're from a traumatized community where you're struggling to survive day to day, no one's teaching you how to soothe yourself when you feel sad, or when you've had a hard day at school, or when you're being bullied, or your mum's told you off. No one's really checking in. They just want you to get on with it. And so often my mum has told me all about her life about 20 times. And one of the things she always talks about is, my mum didn't want me to, if I got upset that I couldn't do maths at school, there was something she couldn't do at school, one subject or something. And it's this idea of, just get on with it. Like, we've got other things to worry about. I can't afford to feed you right now. And I can't afford to do these simple things that I need to survive. And she would just have to sock it in and continue. And there was no time. And I remember you speaking about this in one of your podcasts, like growing up, you don't cry. You stop crying.
Stop crying. Yes. It's the discomfort, sitting with that discomfort of, I can't sit with your discomfort. I can't tolerate your discomfort, because often adults don't know how to tolerate discomfort. So
we're all learning. So I think generally, to answer your question before, the Tamil community has generally missed out on having that chance and that space to be happy and to know what that means. And so coming to this country, seeing us grow up, where our biggest problem is getting to school, or like not even getting to school, sorry, our biggest problem is like passing our GCSEs or something like that. They're like, mate, we didn't even have a chance to study properly because we were too busy worrying about being kidnapped, or
that's
something
deep,
horrible happening. So you're privileged, you're so privileged, and they really love to remind us of that. And I think that can lead to, again, they don't know how to emotionally regulate, so we don't know how to emotionally regulate, and that's how the trauma just keeps going. And it just so
100%. I love that. I think that's so true. And I can see that many other communities will resonate with a lot of this. But I think that we have to talk about the trauma in Tamil communities. We cannot ignore it, because it's so raw. And I didn't know. Thank you for sharing information with me, because I assumed that it was only 30 years of kind of, war. But what we're saying is that it's more than one generation. How many generations are we going back that this conflict has been happening?
I can't even tell you, because I think it's probably sorry, I said probably twice. It's probably since the British basically colonized the
so we're talking about 1800s. 1800s is about right, isn't it? Yeah, so because 200 years.
Because if I might be wrong in this, my history is not accurate, but there is this there is evidence to suggest that the British basically gave a lot of rights to the Sinhalese, and so it meant that the Tamils, I think I might be wrong, the Tamils therefore didn't have as many of the opportunities that Sinhalese people did have. Even though there was obviously no differences in our communities, although it might have been there before. I think there is some historical evidence of that perhaps being there before. Maybe that's why the British gave the Sinhalese people more rights and things like that. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely been a problem. I think my grandfather has told me many stories of my mum and my grandfather, so her father, would often talk well. He spoke Sinhalese, and he would just pretend he was Sinhalese to get by, and that's how he got to be in an educated position, and he got to work in different jobs and things like that, because he changed his name even as well to make sure that he could get by. But if even now, I've been to Sri Lanka many times, as I mentioned, and even I get stopped, and asked to show my passport and things like that. It's only because I'm British that, I don't get into trouble. But being there for 3 months was hard. Like, I saw the differences, and because I was British, I got away with things, but I made friends there that were Tamil, and it wasn't the same for them.
Wow.
And that's, that's 10 years after the war has finished. So it's definitely still going on.
Oh my gosh. So the sort of, the after effects are still very much there. I saw a comment that I think was really interesting. Generational trauma, as well as genetic effects on top of the psychological effects, are so real. Yeah, so what we know about intergenerational trauma is that not only does it kind of have the psychological passing on of behaviors and feelings and thoughts and stuff, it gets down to the molecular DNA of the person. So the trauma embeds so deep that people's chromosomes are adapting and changing.
It's that survival thing, isn't it? They've learned 100%. To survive, and their body's like, I'll take some of that.
It's that mutation, isn't it? It's adaptation and mutation. Yeah, it's fascinating. And the research that I'm aware of is mainly done in Holocaust survivors and their families, Native Americans, and Native Australians as well. So they are the kind of main places. Epigenetics, yes, exactly. So this is all kind of like Yehuda's research that kind of talks about how the cortisol and all this and that is kind of like markers. They're the markers that often are what tells people that, that the trauma has been passed on at a genetic level, which is fascinating on so many levels. Do you know of any research that's been done in kind of like the Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora, or kind of in Sri Lanka? Because that would be really interesting to maybe have a think about. Or
so as far as I'm aware, there isn't. I think there's a lot of proposals going forward. I think there's a lot more attention to it at the moment. The problem is it's still very topical, and there's still a lot of, especially within Sri Lanka, I can't imagine that ever being approved. Or if it was, it would be amazing, and it might be, who knows. But there was a team out there when I was volunteering that sort of were really excited about me working in psychology, because it meant that this kind of work could be done. So it's something I'm really interested in. But yes, it's that there's definitely a lack of hard research out there to back this all up, and I think there are a lot of reasons for that, as we're probably going to look into in a minute. Is that sense of like we mentioned, trust. I think a lot of people aren't ready to come and talk about their experiences, even if it was suggested, or even if they were given the opportunity to. I was working with Amber UK, which is Abuse Never Becomes Us UK. And this was a couple of years ago, and we were trying to look into how to research the prevalence of childhood sexual abuse within the community. I'm not sure how that's going at the moment, but at that time there were difficulties in terms of where do we even start? There's so much that needs to be looked at, just in terms of mental health, in terms of the different sort of patriarchal patterns that we see within the community that are leading up to that research question, if that makes sense. And so there's so much that is needed to be researched, if that makes sense. I think there's basically, I guess, a bit of a overwhelming feeling of where do we begin with this.
I hear that. And especially when you've got a community that is so mistrusting of authority. Can I say that? Is that fair to say? Okay, that makes sense. It almost reminds me of kind of how the Black community they're still struggling. We know this, and how they are still surviving, and how there is huge mistrust with authority and all of that. So, this is huge. It's so huge. And, I think that we're talking about the big broader stuff. And what I would like is to now try and focus down onto what does it look like on the ground in individual families and that sort of stuff. And you said something that really, tweaked my ears, that traumatized communities, they have a lack of trust. And one of the things that you did see when you were working within these communities is psychosis.
Yeah.
So for people who don't understand what psychosis is, let's unpack that. Let's talk about that, and let's explain to people who are joining us what that means.
Yeah. So, psychosis is a term used to describe people that experience symptoms that can mean they're hearing voices. It means that they're having hallucinations. It can mean that they are believing certain delusions. It's a group of symptoms essentially that can be very distressing. So that's the key thing, that these experiences are quite distressing for the person. And so it's not just hallucinations and audio and visual hallucinations. It's also things that take away from their personality as well. So not being able to speak as much as they would like, or the opposite, having thought disorder and speaking a lot and having pressured speech. Or it can mean flat affect, where they have sort of no emotional range. It can lead to low libido and things like that. So it can be a very debilitating illness. And for some people, they can have psychosis for years and function fine. We both know about psychologists who are famously known for doing that. Whereas there's some people who are really badly affected by the psychosis they experience. And what we tend to see in the Tamil community, especially if they've been through the war and had those experiences, is that a lot of those hallucinations and beliefs and those sort of experiences tend to derive from very traumatic experiences. Some people report seeing loved ones that have died, or having soldiers do things to them, and they can, it's not just audio and visual, it's also they can sometimes speak somatic, and they can still smell bombs that have gone off or dead bodies and things like that. So that is what.
And the tricky thing that we are faced with when we have such powerful, I would class these as symptoms. They're telling us something, can't they? Yeah. That these symptoms are telling us something about the person and what they've been through. What we struggle, I think, as clinicians is the difference between complex PTSD, complex trauma, and whether it is something else.
Yeah.
So I wondered what your thoughts were around that, because for me, when you kind of then put those two together, trauma, war, these symptoms, I'm thinking, these kind of like flashbacks, what and that kind of stuff. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, that's an interesting. You're right. In that, I think what my opinion is. I mean, I don't know how qualified I am to have an opinion on this at this point, but
of course you can. Everyone has an opinion.
I think it's about because we don't, as a community, talk about mental health. We don't like to talk about sadness. We don't like to talk about those devastating memories that we have. We need to get on with life. We need to survive. Because of that, I think it leads things like PTSD, like, trauma responses, such as, what the ones I mentioned before, leading on to things as like a full-blown episode of psychosis, which has a different flavor maybe, or, has a sense of chronicity about it. Because I think you know, it's really hard for people, especially coming here as asylum seekers or refugees, to even put into words what they're experiencing. And I think there is that sense of shock as well, the whole sort of experience that they've had. So I think that can lead on to that, but also they are very separate in terms of, as you mentioned, PTSD has a different sort of set of symptoms, is labeled a bit differently, but it is nonetheless a reaction to what they've been through. Whereas I think psychosis is a bit more, like I said, chronic, or it can be chronic. It can just be that one episode, and it might, you know, that individual might not have had anything, any sort of trauma or anything, but, you know, it can still happen where they hear voices and things like that. And that could be because of, you know, potential drug use. It could be because of genetic vulnerability. That it could be because of a really sort of stressful situation that they've been to that has nothing to do with that experience. Or maybe they were born and brought up here, you know, they haven't had that experience of the war. But the sort of rate of psychosis that I've seen in Sri Lanka and here within the Tamil community is quite high. So it leads me to question sort of what is going on there. Like, where is it maybe PTSD sort of trauma-like symptoms, and where is it sort of more psychosis?
It's interesting you say that, because then I think, well, aren't we just talking about intergenerational trauma?
Yeah.
Isn't it that actually these symptoms are extreme reactions to awful events, and that these symptoms, like, you know, somebody mentioned about the epigenetics, that it has so badly changed a person's DNA that it then only makes a person vulnerable to stressful events. So, you know, we talk about the stress diathesis model. I think that's the term. I can never say it right. Which is basically where what we're saying is that people are, you can correct me if I'm wrong, this is probably more fresher in your head than it is in mine, but people have a genetic vulnerability to stress, so that they might have something in their DNA or something in their brain chemistry, and it's because of, you know, whatever, the way they were born and kind of what the parents had been through, blah, blah, blah. And if they go through a slightly traumatic event, they will react in a much more more kind of, you know, a sensitized way, or kind of more so than, say, somebody who hasn't had a history of trauma and, you know, all of this stuff happening in their life. So that's something that maybe I think that needs to still be discussed and spoken about. And there's a huge stigma around psychosis, and you know, I'm no expert in psychosis, so I'm not even going to claim I am. However, what I do know is that, I don't know, within cultural phenomena, I know that, you know, hearing voices isn't actually always seen as a negative thing. You know, so there's something about that is interesting, you know, of kind of like how do our communities hold hearing voices, and is this a Western kind of conceptualization of, you know, what is illness, and what should be regarded as abnormal, and what actually is normal within our communities? I don't know. And also, just to flag up, is that there's been tons of research within psychosis and hearing voices within compassion focused therapy. So that is a type of therapeutic approach which is which it touches all on kind of like different parts of ourselves, and it talks about how we should be applying compassion and kindness to the parts that are vulnerable, to the parts that have been traumatized, and actually that's what helps the healing. But that's in a real nutshell. I'm sure I'll get blasted for it later, but you've just said it all wrong. But in a nutshell,
I think
so there's tons there.
And this sort of reminds me of the great sort of approach of the, you know, systemic approach, and how, you know, I think one of the things that I'm really interested in looking into is how we can use systemic family work to support people experiencing sort of trauma symptoms, PTSD, and sort of how that, especially if that person has been through a traumatic experience, and people experiencing hearing voices as well, especially within the Tamil community, because I think we've spoken about this before in terms of how the community conceptualizes mental health and how we understand it, because I personally don't think we have even a conceptualization of it. I think, well, we probably do, but I don't think it's a particularly very helpful one. And I think approaches like the systemic approach and compassion focused therapy, have a real potential to come together in different forms to really support, especially the Tamil community and other sort of trauma affected communities.
Yeah. I mean, my biggest thing is that what we should be encouraging communities to do is to reclaim narrative, to reclaim their understanding of what is human distress. And I'll go on and on and on about this. There's this huge movement called Drop the Disorder that talks about how actually we should not be pathologizing human distress. Human distress is very much part of being human. And that all these kind of, diagnoses and, treatments and things like that actually are far more detrimental to the communities that are accessing them, for various reasons, like systemic racism and stuff like that. And we need to be rethinking and reevaluating how we are supporting communities and empowering communities to use their own understanding, their own narrative, their own language, their own ways of healing, to kind of overcome these challenges, rather than kind of swooping in and expecting to know how to fix everything. So it's a big thing.
It's a big thing.
I'm conscious of the time, that we've got about 10 minutes left, and I feel like we've only just kind of took the topping off the trifle. So where do we go next? I feel like we've done a really good deep dive in kind of Tamil mental health, and I feel like there's so much more we could potentially talk about, and it'd be great to get some feedback from people that are joining us or people who watch on replay about if you have specific questions around the things that we've spoken about. Would you like us to do something again? Would you like us to talk about a specific topic? And I'm sure we'll be able to pick that up with you. You tell me, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about, I mean, I put down as one of the topics, which was getting onto training. So tell me a bit about that.
So I'm aware we have 10 minutes, so I'm going to do like the whistle stop.
Yes, please.
Tour. So I briefly mentioned my background before. So I've come into this world of psychology, I think, as a way of helping me to really look for answers. So being someone that's, and I'm happy to say that I'm a carer, but obviously I'm not going to go into any more details about who and what and why. But okay. Yes, being a carer meant that I had a lot of experiences that I just was really confused about a lot of the time. And I had a real experience in terms of, I had a lot of questions about the system, mental health services, how they work and how we can improve them. And my first sort of introduction to a clinical psychologist was during sort of family therapy that we had. And the first thing that was very obvious was how Eurocentric everything was. This idea of, okay, in this session, we're going to focus on how to say I love you. And it was like, what? We don't say I love you. We've never said I love you. I mean, maybe some families do, but my family didn't. Wanting to delve into that and use. Oh, hello.
Back.
I can hear you, but I can't. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Oh.
Hi. Oh, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You are back.
Okay,
can
brilliant.
I just say, whoever's commenting, I don't appreciate those comments. If I can kick, so please do comment anything or confidence. Thank you. Carry on.
Yeah. I think the connection
You
is a
talking?
bit off. Can you hear me all right?
Right.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh yeah, apparently we can hear. Okay, cool.
Okay.
So essentially, yeah. So just to get cut to the chase, I decided I'd do psychology, and then I completed a master's in early intervention for psychosis at King's College, and this was something that I loved. It was the first time that I had realized my love for the field of clinical psychology, and I realized what it meant to become a hello.
Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry about
Hi.
that. Right.
We have a really interesting guest on today, I can see.
Yes, I
Yeah.
will block you, by the way. So just letting you know that this is not welcome and not family friendly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, sorry, it's really distracting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not the best, but
Yeah.
cool. We trudge along.
I don't know how to, if anyone knows how to block people whilst on Instagram Live, please let me know.
I think someone mentioned that it might be affecting the signal, which is what I don't know. Which might be why our signal is broken. So yeah, I was just saying I went on to do a master's at King's College London in early intervention for psychosis, and then went to work for IAPT straight from there because I wanted to, learn skills in delivering low intensity CBT. And then I was there for 3 years, and then I went on to an assistant psychology role in a family intervention for psychosis team, and now I'm here.
In a nutshell,
place.
yeah, and that's amazing, isn't it? And I think that one of the questions that I got asked actually, and I wondered if we could, thank you, Vahirance, by the way, how do I get research experience to get onto graduate programs? So I think what people generally are curious about is how do they get the right experience or the experience to get onto masters or doctorates or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm so out of the game because it's been 10 years since I kind of coming up to 10 years, it's 10 years since I qualified. So it was really different back then, and I know how competitive it is now. So you are fresh, have just got onto the clinical training. So
yeah,
please tell us what's it like out there? How easy is it to get experience and
so
get
I
onto
think
training?
It's so difficult. I really feel for everyone on the process because it's grueling. It's so grueling, and it really tests you. I think getting experience seems to be the hardest thing. I think there's a lot of people saying how many assistant psychology posts they've applied for, how many rejections they've got. I've definitely been in that boat. The way I did it was I looked for experience that would teach me sort of skills at first. I was looking for more clinical skills. And that led me to the psychological wellbeing practitioner qualification. And at this point, I was very much aware of sort of the clinical skills I had, but I was still aware of the lack of research skills I had. And the thing is, unfortunately, being an assistant psychologist pays band 4, and this is where the whole debate around sort of privilege comes in, because band 4 is not a lot of money. It's very much below average wage, and so I really had to decide if I wanted to get that experience as an assistant psychologist, where I would be getting some research experience hopefully, and there was potential there for that. I would have to drop a band because being a psychological wellbeing practitioner was band 5.
Oh.
And so in order to, I'm not suggesting people do this because it is a bit difficult, but what had to happen for me to get the experience was to be prepared to be going, have that PWP qualification that actually helped me to get the assistant psychology role. Because when I had feedback, they were saying, oh, you know, it's because you're a psychological wellbeing practitioner, that's one of the reasons why we employed you, because, you know, it's amazing that you've got this qualification to back you up during your time with us, and we can really use that. So there was this sense of having to really sacrifice myself a little bit, which is, I really, you know, it's not nice. The other thing is, so, I mean, that's just a way of me explaining how competitive it has been. The other thing was, I really love saying this, I got a low 2-1 at uni. So I was very much aware that, you know, in order to get into the doctorate, you needed like, you know, 100% in your degree or something ridiculous. Like, you know, they really want people with high grades. So I was very much aware of the fact that I didn't have that. And there are many reasons that led to that. So I immediately applied for a master's at undergrad level when I could see that that was where I was headed. Fortunately, because I came from a low-income family, my master's was funded for me. And so that gave me the research experience as well at master's level. So I think, I don't know if I'm really answering the question because I've been a little bit distracted, but
try and ignore him.
The short answer is there are ways to get that experience, but it does mean, unfortunately, having to sort of, if you can get an assistant psychology role, that'd be great, but there are other ways to do it. You know, if you want to do a master's, or if you can even afford to maybe do something like become a PWP where you're earning band 5 and then volunteer time to do some research and work with people at universities and things like that, which was something that was suggested to me, because once you become a PWP, you can locum, and you can get a locum rate, which is really, it's like a band 6 rate for working. And so some people I know were being a PWP 3 days a week and doing a research assistant post 2 days a week, or doing voluntary research assistant posts 2 days a week. So I would consider looking into ways that can support you financially while allowing you to get that experience that you need for that. But yes, it's definitely a difficult game, and not, my way is not the way for everyone.
There isn't, no. And I don't think and this is a problem, isn't it? Like back in my day, it used to be that you could easily leave your undergraduate post and then just jump onto, you know, assistant posts. Gone are those days, because assistant posts don't exist. So things have changed. So be creative in your kind of approach in the way that you get your experience. And I would say that experience working with people and trying to understand behaviors and all of that, that's all really relevant. And you've got to just reflect, you know, read, you know, talk to psychologists or talk to assistant psychologists, talk to trainees. We are all I like to think we're quite a supportive bunch. And there've been some great, you know, BAME kind of, I hate that word, but you know, initiatives where there's been talks, and it's awesome. I love it what's happening out there. So you know, let's come together and support each other through this.
I totally agree with you. Like, you know, if anyone wants any advice or wants me to look over anything, I'm happy to do so. And like you said, there are lots of people I know who have got onto the course without any research experience, without any publications. You know, I didn't have any publications. I had also done, this is another tip, I guess, is I had done voluntary work within the Tamil community, which is something I talked about a lot, and it was something I was passionate about. And I think that's the most important thing. If you're passionate, like you mentioned before, if you're really passionate about a certain thing, for me it was Tamil community mental health. If that's what you're passionate, or if you're passionate about, I don't know, dog therapy, you know, therapy dogs or something. If there's something you're really passionate about, and
do it.
That's a great topic, by the way.
Absolutely.
Just go for it and focus on that, and that is what's going to get you to where you need to be. Because if what you're passionate about is just the doctorate, I think that is where your heart gets broken, you get defeated, you sort of lose sight of what you're aiming for. But I think if you focus on, why am I doing this doctorate? Is it